Welcome back to How to Tickle Yourself. I'm your host, Duff McDonald, along with my co-host, Joey of Rockledge.
Hello.
Today's guest is a new friend of the podcast. A little over a month ago, I was invited to speak at the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute at Columbia University's Teachers College. Joey came with me, and we had a great time speaking to this year's cohort at SMBI. While we were there, we met Dan Tomasulo, the academic director and core faculty at SMBI. But Dan isn't simply a teacher. He's also the author of a handful of best-selling books, including Learned Hopefulness, The Power of Positivity to Overcome Depression, and The Positivity Effect, both books about overcoming depression. He's also the author of American Snake Pit, a fairly harrowing book about the time he spent relocating the inhabitants of Staten Island's Willowbrook State School for people with intellectual disabilities into a community-based home. In the end, it's uplifting, but, the title, American Snake Pit. Dan has a PhD in psychology, an MFA in writing, and a Master of Applied Positive Psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, so we are fellow graduates. When he's not running schools or writing books, he edits scholarly journals about psychology. Welcome to the show, Dan. It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much, Duff. Terrific. Yeah, I might have to think about changing the title of American Snake Pit downstream, There's something a little more uplifting. But spoiler alert, it turns out just fine.
It turns out great. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a sec.
At the present moment, traveling town to town, the mystery of the motion, right here, right now, right here, right now, whoa, right here, right now.
Let's talk a little bit, though, about SMBI. It was a great experience for both of us to come down there and see what I gather are future teachers engaged with spiritual questions and spiritual issues. Can you tell us about the program?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of unique in terms of Columbia, probably in terms of master's degrees in general. It was the first Ivy League program to put together a program designed to have spirituality in the base of it, at the core of it. So we get people from lots of different avenues. We get some students coming right out of their undergraduate who are very hot to follow, like neuropsych and all that, move into the clinical realm. But we also get people who are shifting careers. They've crushed it on Wall Street, and now they want to find something maybe with a deeper meaning or a broader meaning, or apply their finances to some other purpose. We have folks coming from law, from medicine. We have lots of folks who are in a transformative or transition space in their life. So when we look, we don't look for a traditional student per se. They're typically going to go in another vein, the clinical program or something like that. But these are students who either have a profound interest in spiritual development and spiritual growth, or who have had an experience in their life that they've been integrating and have become aware about the need for a transcendent relationship, and then all the science behind that. So we get a pretty broad range.
And we'd be remiss to not mention that we got introduced to both Dan and the Institute by our friend Lisa Miller, who we have already interviewed on this podcast. And she is faculty at SMBI?
Yeah, she is. She is a professor at TC Columbia, but she's the founder of the program.
Okay.
And so, if you go back 10 years or so ago, we were founded under a grant to kind of find non-traditional students. And obviously, Dr. Miller's work is stellar. She's published in all the top journals, JAMA, and other journals about linkages she's found with spiritual growth and development. It's protective factors in things like, particularly for adolescents, protective factors for their behaviors. So suicidal thoughts, conduct disorders, drug and alcohol abuse. So we're finding that this is not just sort of a light science or a casual addressing to spiritual research and practice, but this has got some real legs to it about how can you help people have a buffer against the difficulties of life.
And what brought you to SMBI?
How much time do we have? Oh, okay. So the fairly short answer is I was a trauma expert, I guess you'd say, and I worked for many years with very difficult populations. People with very low IQs and psychiatric dilemmas. Almost all of them had PTSD. And actually, I wrote some of the criteria for diagnosing people with intellectual disabilities who had PTSD. So there's books and stuff that do that. And so I was pretty heavily immersed in that field and was kind of like rolling along. But then I went through my trauma, and it's like very different talking about it, researching it, helping other people through it than when you go through it. And it was like, oh, I see. Yeah. And then for what it's worth, I knew all the stuff that you needed to do to get out of the space I was in. And I went and I knew all the right clinicians and the right people and all that kind of stuff and had access, and absolutely nothing worked. Absolutely nothing worked. Now, maybe you could say, well, it's because you knew a lot about it, so maybe there was some resistance. But the bottom line is I tried everything, and I was really stuck. And there's really nothing worse than a depressed psychologist. If you're in the market for a psychologist, do not choose a depressed one. And at the time, my best friend was sort of watching me go through this, and he says, Marty Seligman's doing this new thing at UPenn on positive psychology. What do you say we go? And when you're in a bad mood, you just go, nah. I don't want anything. I'm miserable. I'd like to really just nurture that misery and not do anything about it. So he didn't pay attention, got us tickets. I went to this conference, and it blew my mind. I was originally trained as a researcher, and I was like, oh my God, if 1/10 of what they're talking about is half true, we're in for a renaissance here. This is gonna shake things up. So I applied to the program. I didn't need another degree. I was like, I had enough degrees, but it was like, I really want to learn this. So I went to UPenn. When I got there, I found out I was the first psychologist and psychodramatist that they had let into the program. So I asked Marty, how come? And he says, well, you're not a normal psychologist. and he still says that. So I think it was because I had different disciplines. I was doing writing and psychology, whatever. When I finished the program, Marty asked me to join the faculty there as his assistant. So I did that. And then a couple of years after doing that, Dr. Miller, who was also a student of Marty's, called him up and said, do you have any psychologists that could design a positive psych course for us? And he said, yeah, recommended me. She called me up. And it was, I'll never forget, it was in December, and they were talking about this thing. And I said, to myself, this will be great. I can start it next September. I'll have all this time to plan the course. And she says, no, it starts in, 15 days. Okay. But I did know the material, started the course. And then the course became very popular. The clinical program there is very traditional in all the right ways, but this was new, and so students, I think, were drawn to the idea of, I don't just want to diagnose people, I want to learn about the other side of this. And then after a couple of years of doing that, Lisa said they were doing a search for the academic director, and I did not apply. I didn't think it was something that I was suited for or had the ability to do. And she just called me up and said, we've looked at everybody, nobody can agree on it, but they did agree that if you take the job, that they'd give it to you. And I was like, really? And so I tell the story. Everybody talks about getting a calling. My calling was a call from Lisa Miller. And so that's how I got into it.
Wow. That's amazing. But you talk in the positivity effect. I loved that book, by the way. And you give such a systematic approach to changing the way your mind works and changing all of it. Like, I sort of stumbled into that when I was in my mid-20s and learned, you've got to replace a negative thought. You can't just not think negatively. One of the things I really liked is you talked about how our body believes our thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. And you said that we have choice and control over our thoughts. Can you talk just a little bit about that, about how you, like when you are sort of in that stuck place, what's the first step to getting out of it? Like, what do you do?
Yeah. Just to go zen on you here for a second.
We love that.
Knowing that you're stuck is really interesting. Just to take that as a concept, because what it implies is that there's a witness, there's an awareness, there's a part of your consciousness that is not the experience. It is observing the experience. So if we just start there, that in and of itself is very empowering, because at the end of the day, the goal for all of this transformation has to do with emotional regulation, right? You're doing a emotional self-regulation, and when you can witness an emotion that you do not like and do not want to have, we have three components. We have the witness part, we have the experience part, and then we have a little something over here with a question mark on it. There must be something better. And once you can step back and have that experience, you may not know what the something better is, but because of the feeling of dysregulation and discomfort, you're like, there's got to be something better than this, So just the framework of that, I think, is important. And then, just to use a clinical term, there's something known as dialectical thinking. And dialectical thinking really has to do with being able to hold two truths simultaneously. So you might say to yourself, I'm really depressed about losing my job, or I'm really depressed about this situation. But there's another truth right up alongside of that. But I really feel loved by my family. And so what starts to happen, if you can use that witness component to recognize that you may have intrusive rumination with repetitive negative thought that has to be countered with deliberate rumination. You need something on the other side. And I think one of the reasons I wrote The Positivity Effect is like, so some of my friends have said, you're building a stairway to heaven. Yes, one step at a time. It's like, first do this, and having gratitude is maybe one of the lowest hanging pieces of fruit in positive psychology, because it's already taken place. So if you're having, say, geez, I lost my job, but I do have savings, like, in other words, you start recognizing that there may be a counterbalance, and that becomes very, very dialectical. Oh, there are two truths. Yes, I have money in the bank and I've lost my job. And the witness part that can hold that, that's the part that really grows. And that's how consciousness and our capacity for thinking really evolves through that thing. So I always begin with, let's do a gratitude review of very specific things in the last 24 hours. And it gets people out of that default network of their brain.
What's interesting is that I have my dialectic that I have become increasingly capable of conjuring in the moment of a negative thought, which is I just go right to the top. I'm like, this is all still happening. At least this is all still happening, right?
It's a fail-safe stuff. I like that.
Right. So, and it's great because it does trivialize whatever was supposedly going up against it. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, what's today's problem versus that I still exist. So I find that really helpful and like, there are times when obviously you have to look for it, but what I find really sort of wonderful is that it pops up now spontaneously.
Yeah.
Because I'd been doing it and trying to practice it, and it comes up and it's like, no, here you go again.
Yeah. I think the metaphor I've used in the book is the wipe on, wipe off from the Karate Kid.
Yeah.
We have to learn in the beginning all the moves, but it's really like emotional memory. It's like if you don't have that in there, that going to it, then when the feces hits the oscillator, you might not be prepared.
I love that. You've got to make your mind your friend, right? So it's like you're giving your mind a task, and now its job is to look for the good things, the uplifting things.
Yeah. What a good phrase,
on a related note, I came across in American Snake Pit. I came across, you quoted H.G. Wells, something I'd never heard before, and it's so great. Beauty is in the heart of the beholder. Right? Which reminded me, it's like, oh yeah, okay. So all we got to do is find the beauty everywhere. And if you can keep practicing that too, then it sort of makes all the other stuff pale in comparison.
Yeah.
It's a delightful quote.
Thank you. I think that's, often, because I've had, some experience as a writer. I really love when other writers have sort of collapsed and synthesized in material. My daughter is a poet, and whenever I'm working on something, I tell her what it is. She's also been through the MAP program, so she's and also Marty's assistant and stuff like that. So I'll tell her I'm working on X, Y, and Z, and she says, "Oh, you got to read Jane Hirsch. You got to. Here's the quote. Here's the thing." And then, sure enough, I find that just like Freud had said, that the poets have been there before us, and we're just kind of catching up with the science. Jane Hirschfeld has this poem called Rebus, and I'll probably butcher it now, but it says, as sugar sweetens water, adding salt grows salty, we become our choices. Each yes, each no continues. It was like, okay, stop the presses. She's said it all. We become our choices. Oh my goodness,
That's amazing.
We normally end each episode after the guest is off. I go to Sri Aurobindo, the Indian philosopher and poet. It turns out that, according to the thing you were just saying, whatever the topic, he's been there. He's been there. And thank God for computers, because I have the collected works of Sri Aurobindo in a PDF, right? And it's tens of thousands of pages of work. And all I got to do is go in and start grazing around on the topic of the day. He's said it, and he's said it beautifully.
Right.
Always.
Right.
It's amazing.
Isn't that something? It really... when you talk about realized people or poets who can condense it, it's like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? I think of it, earlier on, but now I know if I'm going to try to write something, I'll spend a large chunk of my time looking for the right quote, because it's like, cracking the egg. It's like, oh, everything will open up if I get the right quote.
Right. Totally.
So you also in the positivity effect, you talked a little bit about obsessive passion and harmonious passion,
Yes.
which, on How to Tickle Yourself, we refer to as the tickle.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Just explain the difference and how
Sure.
to invite more harmonious passion into your life.
Yeah. Bob Valerone is the lead researcher. He's at the University of Montreal and also a dear friend. And the thing I admire about his work is that he took a concept that kind of gets thrown around a lot, but really started to nail down how it can be applied in different ways. And Bob's no slouch. I think he's won pretty much every award that the Olympic committees have, because he studies very high end athletes, very high end performers, studies the NBA, that kind of thing. And what he found out is that if you're going to stand on the medal stage where you're going to get the gold, the silver, or the medal, you have to be passionate about what you're doing. There's no doubt about that, right? Nobody's going to get there. I think even Steve Jobs had said that, the passion is going to be the drive. But there are two kinds of passion. You can have obsessive passion, or you could have harmonious passion. And this, once you get inside the research and see what he's saying, is that in the obsessive passion, you have an on switch, and that you're on, but the thing you're doing owns you. Like you're not doing it, it's doing you, right? It's like that kind of thing. So you don't have that off button. You can't back away from it. Are you going to be successful? Yes. Are you going to have more injuries, more sort of collateral damage? Yes. He studied, I believe, the cycling team in Canada, and the obsessively passionate athletes, when it was snowing, they'd still go out for a 100-mile ride, but they'd slip, they'd fall, they'd hurt themselves. Whereas the harmonious passionate athletes would say, no, today's an indoor workout. I'm going to work on my oxygen capacity or something else. So they were able to let go of what it was that they were after in the service of something more aligned with their well-being. Two other quick things about that is that the harmoniously passionate people actually work a little less time on whatever it is they're doing, but they work a little bit more specifically. In other words, they hit the nail on the head a little bit more often when they're doing that. Whereas the obsessive folks are just grinding it out, trying to do more, and they might get there, but they're going to have some scars along the way. And then the last part about that, which this is the part that I really loved, is that the harmoniously passionate people are using their signature strengths, their top strengths, the things that they know they're really good at, and that's what helps them kind of get in that flow. Whereas the obsessively passionate people are almost always compensating. They're doing their thing with such intensity because they're compensating for some deficiency somewhere.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about Rose, Thorn, and Bud?
Yeah,
I love that.
Bud, right. It's a law firm in Philadelphia. That's the only bad joke I'll tell. No, I've already told two other bad jokes. So that's the third of bad jokes. What I like about Rose, Thorn, and Bud is for people at the end of the book, I talk about this because you want to talk about the good things, the roses in your life, like what has happened, the achievements, the accomplishments. This is really good stuff. The thorns are about the challenges, right? And we don't want to just, positive psychology has been accused of, although it's not true, that we want to not deal with anything negative. No, the truth is we just want to have a good balance. We're looking after a good balance. So the Rose, Thorn, Bud gives you that sense of there's something really good that's already happened, or that's in the moment of happening. It's flourishing. It's happening for you. There's a challenge that's sort of right in front of you that's a little sticky. You got to be careful with it. You have to pay attention to it in a different way. And then there's something on the horizon. There's something percolating downstream. So I invite my classes and folks I work with to think about those things so that it doesn't get lopsided. Because if we're trying to, like with the pebbles and feathers, pebbles being negative thoughts and feathers being positive thoughts, if we're trying to balance that out, you want to keep the pebbles off the one end of the scale, add a lot of feathers, but continually come back to a balance.
I love that. I'd heard of the rose and thorn, and I've done that a little bit with Duff's daughter, Marguerite. We've talked about that a bit, but I didn't know about the bud.
Yes. Yeah.
So
What's
the bud
to
is
come?
the hope, right?
Yeah, exactly. What's to come?
So
That's
I got a
awesome.
question. It comes from, I think I read this, another quote. Like you, I pick up on the good ones where in other writers' work where I'm like, damn, he got it here. So just to preface though, one of my ways I like to think about the universe or nature these days is as a perfect possibility machine. Right? So if we leave a forest to itself and we don't go in and do human stuff, it knows what to do, right? Everything does what it's supposed to do. The leaves fall, the mushrooms sprout, the animal eats, the this, that. All the possibilities that are sort of it's pregnant with generally come to pass. There'll be big waves of change or ever, but nature is sort of structured to take advantage of its own possibilities.
Right.
We are too, but we get in the way of our own possibilities.
Yes.
We are possibility machines within the possibility machine. And so you had this quote from William James where he said, if any organism fails to fulfill its potentialities, it becomes sick. And to me, it's only dawned on me recently that both our physical and or mental sicknesses that we can have can both derive from a sense of failed potential. Right? Or failure to capitalize on one's opportunities because you're either acting in a way that isn't in your nature or you're stifling something you shouldn't. Can you talk about that for a bit, like from a psychological perspective? Like the way I read it is if you aren't present enough to take advantage of the possibilities that the universe offers to you, your organism is going to move into some kind of failure because you're not in the dance of life with everything.
Yeah.
Is that what that means?
Yeah, I think that is certainly a large component of it. My experience has been to add another feature to that, which is, can we remove the obstacles that may be limiting that potentiality, right? Because there's what's there, and then there's also what the obstacles are. So sometimes those obstacles are our own hurdles, our own things that we're kind of throwing in the way, or we're not seeing it properly, or that kind of thing. But just to go back to it for a second. In American Snake Pit, at that point in time, you're talking about the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. Here were people that were called incurable, right? And they were called that, right? And so they didn't provide any resources at all. And I'll spare you the whole shebang about that. But at the end of the day, it was about the institutions and the way they were treating the people were blocking their potentiality. So they may have not had a good start, but they were becoming sicker and more violent and more difficult because that their potentialities weren't able to be expressed. And when we had this highly experimental group of really just a handful of people in the community, it was about removing those obstacles, not necessarily doing something to give them more of what they had naturally, but taking away the obstacles that were limiting them. So I think there's both parts, right? There's what we can do for others and with others in order to remove the obstacles that may be limiting their inherent or natural talents. And then there's what we need to acknowledge inside ourselves that's already there that needs to find the right expression.
Wow. It's like the Rumi quote where he talks about we don't have to seek love. We just have to sort of dust away the things that are blocking it, right?
Absolutely.
It's already there.
Yeah,
That's
already
awesome.
there. Yep.
You know, I would like to nominate myself as a case study in positive psychology. This just occurred to me. For a lot of my career, I wrote about business, and it was increasingly critical. My last main business book was called The Golden Passport. It was about Harvard Business School, and it was 600 pages of seething righteousness, moral righteousness. And at the end of it, I was a little sick myself from the effort. And then during quarantine, when I was about to start another book, as you know from the talk I gave at SMBI, I suddenly realized, I was like, oh, wait, I'm going to write a book about the things that make me happy. And Tickled was the result. And it was the easiest book I've ever written. It was the best book I've ever written. It opened up all sorts of insights, just sort of being in that state, rather than writing in anger about someone else's, actions.
Right.
And to your point, it's not that I am sitting here sort of blithely ignoring things that need to be addressed in my life at any particular point in time, but switching my focus from being a critic to being a celebrator of things that tickle. Everything went up, like my whole life turned upside down in a good way.
You're putting the emphasis on the other syllable.
On the right syllable. My father used to say that.
So the nomination has been accepted and you have won the award. Well done. Well done.
No,
Yeah.
and like it's sort of startling too, because I sit there and I look at it and I go, wow, what took so long?
Right.
What took me so long to realize that writing in anger might not be good for my mood?
Yeah, right.
Or that
Right.
there might be a better product, like a better quality of thought come out of me if I happen to be thinking happy thoughts while I'm writing.
Right.
But, liberation is at hand. Oh, okay, I got another one here. In Learned Hopefulness, you cite Albert Ellis, and he was referring to something that they call masturbation. Which is, I must do this, I should do this. You're talking about how we tie ourselves up by thinking that there are things that we should do. So it's sort of self-criticism. And in Tickled, my friend Chris Wink, I was talking about how we're quant happy these days as society becomes overly quantified. And he came up with statsurbation. He goes, we're living in a time of statsurbation where all we want is stats. Give me some stats and I'll, do that thing.
So this
but it's
is
funny.
where...
Both are tricks of the mind, right? Yeah. Both are your mind, basically focusing you on some things that aren't really real and distracting you and obsessing you.
My comic mind would have said after statsurbation and masturbation that I have to hand it to you, but I'm not going to. I'm just not going to do that. I won't. I won't do it.
Thank you. Thank you for sparing us.
So we have been asking our guests recently if they can tell us what is currently tickling them. So what are 2 things in your life that are giving you that sort of joy of existence?
What a great question. I'm gonna really capitalize on who I'm talking to and your story, because your authenticity in coming and talking to us was palpable. I mean, I could feel your journey, if that's even possible. I could feel it as you were talking about it, because it was so authentic. And that when you started talking about Tickled and how you wrote it and how it was such a divergence from what you were used to, and that it sort of flowed out of you. Well, academic writing will destroy your brain. There's no two ways about it. You get, you can't have a thought without it being APA style referenced. So I have been leaning into writing my next book, and these last two books are very well documented, the Learned Hopefulness and the Positivity Effect, because that's the way you have to approach it. But the style of writing this next book was really, I wanted to let my creative writing process out. I've been trained in writing, screenwriting, all this, and I've had backlogs of stories. So, but I haven't flushed them out. I decided to do this new book and just telling the stories and leave all the science for the end. So that I have the stories that I want to tell, but it's such a different writing process. So what's been tickling me is I can't wait now. Before I love writing in general, but it's like, I have to look up 300 references for this paragraph, this kind of thing. But now it's like, these stories, I can't wait to write them. And then I'm laughing as I'm writing. I'm like, it's like, isn't that the way it should be?
Yes.
And then later on, I'll come back and I'll show the principles, the spiritual principles, positive psychology principles that have all the research. But I was going to try to weave the research in there. But after listening to you, it's like, no, let me get tickled first. So that's
that's so awesome. So in the Golden Passport, the Harvard book, I think there are 1,000 footnotes.
Yeah.
And when I was starting to write Tickled and realized that it was going to be much more of a memoir, sort of a personal thing, I had exactly the same instinct as you. I was like, I don't need to cite anyone else on the point that I'm about to make here. I can make this point. So Tickled has about 60 footnotes overall, and maybe 50 of them are J.K. Rowling. They're all from Harry Potter. Because same point as we made earlier. If you want to make a point about life, J.K. Rowling has a good quote about it somewhere in the Harry Potter stories. No, I highly endorse that decision because it's freeing, and at least for me, my ability to, if you're not sort of like when you're trying to tell a story, if you're not shifting in and out and saying, here's what someone else said about this, like is it's like a start stop, even though it looks like the paragraph's one stream of stuff. If you can keep it in your own voice, you can't help but have more impact.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think I've been building towards this point. And the people that I trust who are writers, and I'll show them two versions of it, and they're like part way through the first version that's got all the academic references, and they're like, yeah, no, you're gonna have to do that over again. and then I show them the other part, and they go, just keep doing that. So that's been very liberating. And again, I think you're, like I said, I was leaning in that direction, so you pushed me over the top in a good way.
Wow, that's great to hear.
It's the tickle ripple.
Tickle ripple. There we go. Let's get shirts with that on it.
Right. Tickle ripple.
On which note, or wait, do you have a second tickle for us?
For me.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I am built like a fire hydrant. I do not bend or stretch. I've done, I cycle, I run, I do all these things, but I do not stretch before, after, during, or at all. And now I realized that I need yoga. And I have tried yoga several times, and it has always been a disaster because I do one downward facing dog, and I get so much energy, I can't sleep for a month. It's like ridiculous. whatever. I went to, I'm on the staff at Capello for teaching stuff up there, but for positive psych. And I said, I'll join the faculty, but I need a consult. And they said, yeah, you got a lot of that energy already. You have to just imagine the positions. So for years, I've done that. But now I'm doing the restorative, or I guess they call it yin yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. It's sort of like I am a tense little dude, but now I've been doing it since January. I love it. It's like, oh, I can't wait to write and I can't wait to go to yoga class. My yoga instructor's got this great thing where, I can follow about 2/3 of it. And then she says, now wrap the strap around your left foot and slowly pull it up to the back of your head. And I just burst out laughing. Or just listen.
Think about it. Think about pulling your foot up to your head.
All right. So we mentioned, Joey, you mentioned the ripple effect of the tickle. It brings me to how I want to close out here. I want to read a little thing from the end of Dan's book, American Snake Pit. As he said, it does end on a high note. And it's slightly edited just so it makes sense to the listener here. But this one's for you, Joey, because it's kind of just sounds like you. So Dan says at the end, he says, there's one character strength in particular that will always help. The kindness you show to others helps them, helps you, and helps anyone who is witness to it. Kindness creates a strong ripple effect. Finding a way to be kind has real value. It is the fastest way to bring you out of your negative mood and the most direct way of helping someone else.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Thank you for joining us, Dan. It's been a thrill.
This was wonderful.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Such a treat, a real treat. Thank you.
Can't wait to see you soon. Cheers.
Oh, he's such a sweetheart. I love him. So much fun.
Yeah, we went down to SMBI because we knew Lisa Miller, who invited us. But we met Dan while we were there, and it was clear as day in the short time we spoke to him and stuff that we should have him on the show. His books are great. He's trying to point the way to a better way to be. Pretty much in everything he does.
I wish I'd had it 25 years ago. I sort of stumbled through it. It took me a little while to get my stride, but everything he was talking about, the positivity effect, I sort of, my angel mom introduced the idea to me first. And then I, started practicing, making a sincere effort to get a hold of my thoughts.
I didn't admit there that I used to poo-poo positive psychology. I thought it was nonsense.
It's okay. I believe it. So
I thought that the idea that you could just change your thoughts and change your reality was not the case. And I was too focused on externals, right? And thinking that the external world existed separately from you. And, the fact is, it doesn't, right? It's all one thing.
Well, the first time I'd heard about it, our meditation teacher, he's like, you might have free will. He's like, I can change a thought. That's all I can do. So I was like, if all he can do is change a thought, that's probably all I can do. So I was like, I'm going to give this a shot. It worked. It took me a little while, but, settled in.
So on a similar note, related note, so, the yogic idea of the ego is sort of who we think we are, which is taking a lot of credit for some actions, taking blame for other things. It's the source of suffering, where we feel responsible for the things that happen to us. And I was reading this guy Sri Atmananda last week, and he had this great line where he said, "The ego is a child born of no mother." the ego is a bachelor who dreams that he married the body and senses. You are always groaning under his weight. And the point he's really making there is that a child born of no mother actually can't exist, right? The bachelor who dreams that he married the body and senses, he's still a bachelor. The ego isn't real. Or a better way to say that is that it's all our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that you can't change things for yourself by re-architecting your thoughts,
right,
is not really true, because it's pretty much all that your experience in the manifestation is. It's a set of thoughts about what you think is happening and who you think you are.
That's
and
right. I love Eckhart Tolle's. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, like Dan's books, his 2 books, Positivity Effect and Learned Hopefulness, are about re-architecting that. It's great.
Yep. Yeah, he was great. He, when talking about the witness sort of part of us, that once you can get some distance between an emotion and that part watching you, it's a game changer. And Eckhart Tolle talks about that and had a pretty profound impact on me, and being able to see my ego and watch it in action, and know that I'm more than that, right? That it's not just the story. I mean, it's a great story. It's fun, but it's very distracting. So it was great for helping me.
My story just keeps getting better, right? Not only the ones I write, but the one I'm living. Right? Turns out you can get better at telling your own story. So on which note, and I mentioned Aurobindo earlier. We don't have an Aurobindo this week because I got obsessed with this guy, Sri Atmananda, who is one of the great Vedantic thinkers of the 20th century. And he makes a point, and this is part and parcel of what Dan's talking about in terms of positive thinking and positive psychology. So in one of his books of his spiritual discourses, he makes a list of what he calls the nearest and immediate expressions of the absolute. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says to Arjuna, he says, "I'm everything, but if you want specific examples of me, I can give you a list." And he basically gives a list of the greatest of all sorts of things. The highest mountain, the most beautiful river, the strongest god, the whatever. So Atmananda makes a list here of nearest and immediate expressions of the absolute. And he says, don't mistake any of these for the self, but you can certainly see me, the absolute, through any of these expressions of myself. So it's the same point Krishna is making in the Gita. Number 1, light and joy. Number 2, love and power. 3, splendor and majesty. 4, beauty and goodness. I don't know why I'm reading the numbers here. Harmony and peace. Rich and full. Grand and noble. Pure and innocent. Calm and serene. Sweet and soft. Cheerful and happy. These are the nearest and immediate expressions of the absolute. Don't mistake them for the self, but you can certainly see the absolute through any of them. There's your list. It's the 10 things you need to remember.
Or just be those things.
Be those things. Everything from light and joy all the way to sweet and soft and cheerful and happy. Wait, you already are all those things.
I'm the nearest thing.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back with you in a week.
Thank you. Bye-bye. You've been listening to How to Tickle Yourself with your host, Duff McDonald, and me, Joey of Rockledge. You can help us by liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast with others. You can talk to us and see what else is happening on Instagram and Facebook at How to Tickle Yourself. This program was recorded in Studio B of the historic Rockledge Recording Studio. Right Here, Right Now, our original 16-part theme music, was written and recorded by the legendary Paul Reddick and Kyle Ferguson of the Sidemen, with Steve Mariner on bass and drums and in the mixing room. This podcast is produced and distributed by Storic Media. Our editor is Oscar Desiderio. Our producers are Kristen Verbitsky and Chuck Labella. For more information, visit storicmedia.com. That's STORIC media.com.